Ever feel like all those standardized tests in school kind of like
Yeah.
sucked the creativity right out of you? Like somewhere along the line, we had to trade in imagination and just went with practicality instead.
Yeah, this text we're diving into, it really digs into that. It talks about how a lot of school systems, without meaning to, I guess, end up making people less creative. Like
Right.
instead of helping us grow that spark we all have, we're told to fit in and get the one right answer.
It's so true. It's like being told to stay inside the lines from day one and not just when you're drawing.
Exactly. And the thing is, that can really stick with you. This source even says that it can make us believe we're just not creative.
When really it's more like we were taught to ignore that side of ourselves.
Exactly.
Okay, so then how do we get out of that box? How do we get back that creative freedom that we might have lost touch with?
Well, this text points to something pretty interesting, and that's intuition. It says that we've all got this inner guide, this like well of creativity inside of us, but we need to figure out how to listen to it. Think about a time you just suddenly understood something, like the answer just popped into your head out of nowhere. That's your intuition.
That reminds me of this presentation I was putting together. I just could not figure out how to start it. And then I was walking my dog, and it wasn't some big aha moment. It was just this quiet thought, and the perfect opening line came to me.
See. And that's what this source wants us to do. Learn to listen for those quiet nudges from our intuition. It's about making space for those breakthroughs by quieting that inner critic, the one that's always doubting everything.
So we need to quiet our minds to make room for those insights. What about those of us who feel like our minds never stop racing? Are there any tips this text suggests?
Oh, absolutely. One thing it really emphasizes is something called conscious creation.
Conscious creation.
Yeah, it's about switching from those autopilot everyday habits to a way of creating that's more deliberate, more intentional. It's not about forcing ideas, but being open to them.
So instead of trying to come up with these amazing ideas out of thin air, it's more about creating the right environment for them to just pop up naturally.
Yes. The text even suggests things like setting aside actual time for exploring your creative side, doing things that spark your imagination, surrounding yourself with inspiration.
This is kind of starting to sound like mindfulness, but for creativity.
There's definitely a connection. The source is saying that being present right here, right now, is super important for tapping into our creativity. Because when we're stuck in the past or worried about the future, we can't think as clearly, we can't be as creative.
Makes sense. But then there's this other side to creativity that feels kind of, I don't know, serious. We're not just talking about making pretty things, are we? This source talks about responsibility when it comes to creating.
That's a really important point, and it's something this text spends a lot of time on. It argues that everything we create has this ripple effect.
Okay.
A painting, a song, a business idea, even just a choice we make in our relationships. Our creations have an impact beyond just ourselves.
It's like that butterfly effect thing, but with creativity. So even if it seems small, what we create can have consequences we never intended, good or bad.
Exactly. The example the text uses is the internet. It's this amazing tool, but it's also got a dark side, fake news, cyberbullying, all the privacy issues. Those who invented the internet probably didn't think about those things.
It's kind of a warning, isn't it? We get excited about the good things our creations can do, but we don't always see the potential downsides.
That's exactly why this text says it's so important to be thoughtful when we're creating, to be aware. It's not just about, can I create this, but should I create this, and what might happen because of it?
Those are some tough questions, honestly. Like, how are we even supposed to think about those things when we're caught up in the excitement of a new idea or a new project?
Well, it starts with what the text calls mindful creation. Approaching creation with a bit more humility, admitting we don't have all the answers, and being open to looking at things from different angles, considering what might happen because of what we're making.
So not just blindly going after what feels creatively exciting, but like bringing a sense of awareness and careful thought to it.
Yes, exactly. It's about using both our head and our heart, our intuition and our logic, to create in a way that feels good to us and is good for the world.
I really like that. It's like this text wants us to be more conscious, more compassionate in how we create, thinking about everyone and everything, not just ourselves.
Yes, absolutely. And a key part of that is being vulnerable.
Vulnerable. How does that play into creativity? Wouldn't we want to feel confident and sure of ourselves when we're creating something?
It might seem counterintuitive, but the source is saying that real creativity means letting go of that need for perfection and embracing the unknown. It's about being okay with making mistakes, trying things out, and sharing our work even when it feels scary or unfinished.
See, I think a lot of us, myself included, are scared of being judged for our creativity. We don't want to put it out there unless we think it's good enough.
And that fear, that need for someone else to tell us it's good, it can really stifle our creativity. Think about a time when you felt really, truly free in your creativity. I bet it wasn't about impressing someone else. It was about the pure joy of creating.
You're so right. When I think back to those times, I was so in the moment, so into what I was creating, that I genuinely didn't care what other people thought.
Exactly. And that's the kind of freedom this source wants us to cultivate. It's about letting go of that need to control how it turns out and just letting ourselves create for the pure joy of it.
You know, that reminds me of something else this source talks about, the importance of letting go. But it's not just about letting go of perfectionism, is it? It feels much bigger than that.
You're right, and that's actually where we'll pick back up in part 2 of this deep dive. This whole idea of letting go is crucial to how creativity can change us, and we're going to really explore what that means.
So we were talking about letting go. It's something people say a lot, but when it comes to creativity, what does it actually mean?
It's like surrendering to the whole creative process, you know?
Okay.
Letting go of being fixated on a specific result and trusting that something meaningful will come out of it, even if it's not what we pictured at the beginning.
I get that, but it's got to be easier said than done. Like, it's natural to want to have some control over what we create, to kind of steer it in the direction we want.
Right, totally. This text even says that letting go can seem kind of backward, even a little scary to our logical minds.
Okay. Yeah.
It actually compares it to letting go of your baby, the product of your creativity.
All right, I get why you said scary before. That comparison really makes you realize how powerful this idea is.
It's about recognizing that the things we create take on a life of their own.
Okay.
Think about a time when you poured your heart into a project, but it was received differently than you expected, maybe even got some criticism.
Oh, yeah.
That can sting.
All right. Oh, yeah, for sure. I've definitely had those creative disappointments, like putting myself out there and then it just falls flat.
Right. And that kind of experience can make us want to hold even tighter to our creations, try to control how everyone sees them.
Right.
But this text is saying that by holding on so tightly, we're actually limiting what we can create.
It's like that saying, the more you try to control something, the more it slips away.
Exactly. And that's where this whole dying to yourself idea comes in. Don't worry, it's not literal, but it's about letting go of the need to be recognized, that need to be in control.
Oh.
This source says that real creative freedom happens when we create from a place of selflessness, where just the act of creating is its own reward, not the praise we might get from others.
That makes me think of artists who create just for themselves, never even showing their work to anyone. It's like their creative expression is a personal journey, not about fame or anything like that.
Exactly. And the text suggests that we can all find that kind of freedom, even if we're creating for others to see. It's about that balance between pouring ourselves into our work and being okay if it doesn't turn out exactly how we planned.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? How do we find that balance between passion and letting go?
Yeah.
Because it honestly sounds kind of tricky.
It is. This text emphasizes what it calls holding a conscious orientation beyond current abilities to see.
Wow.
Basically, it means developing a broader perspective, being willing to see beyond our own egos, and tapping into a wisdom that we might not even realize we have yet.
That sounds kind of spiritual.
It kind of is. The text actually talks about creativity as a journey of listening and silence, about personal devotion to self-seeing beforehand and selfless wisdom to read the cues correctly enough.
So being more in tune with something bigger than ourselves, something that can guide our creative process.
Exactly. And that guidance, according to the source, it can come from anywhere: our intuition, nature, our relationships, even our dreams.
Okay.
It's about being open to inspiration from unexpected places and trusting that the creative process will unfold naturally.
This is really making me think. It's like this source is saying that creativity isn't just a skill, it's a spiritual practice that helps us grow.
And it's definitely not always neat and tidy. It's about facing our limitations, our fears, and all those patterns that can block us creatively.
Speaking of blocks, what does this source say about those? How do we get through those times when we doubt ourselves or feel stuck?
Well, it says that incompleteness is about being a process awareness. It is never ready, always on the way towards something and coming from somewhere and trying to access the nowness.
So instead of beating ourselves up for not being further along or comparing ourselves to others, it's about embracing where we are in the journey.
Exactly. It's about being brave enough to stay present with our creativity, even when it's messy, frustrating, or even scary. The text wants us to see those challenges as chances to grow and learn, not as proof that we're doing it wrong.
It's like we need to be kinder to ourselves during the creative process. Celebrate the small wins, embrace the missteps, and trust that even when it feels like we're failing, we're actually learning something valuable.
That's a great point. The source really emphasizes that true creativity isn't about some external measure of success, but about how we change internally as we create authentically.
So it's about the journey, not the destination. But how do we stay on track, especially when things get tough?
The text highlights a few key things. Humility for self and others, unlimited time, holding a conscious orientation beyond current abilities to see, surrendering to the process and the truths revealed by it without judging and categorizing before realizing multiple truths and having experience of the process.
Wow, that's a lot. So patience is key.
Absolutely. Creativity doesn't always stick to our schedules, right? An idea might take days, weeks, even years to fully develop, and that's where humility for self and others comes in.
So being patient with ourselves, but also understanding that everyone's creative journey is different.
Precisely. It's about letting go of comparisons and embracing our own unique creative rhythm. And when things get tough, remember what the text said about surrendering to the process and the truths revealed by it.
What does that actually look like? Surrendering to the creative process.
It's about approaching our creativity with curiosity and openness instead of trying to control everything.
Okay.
Being willing to experiment, make mistakes, and follow those creative sparks, even if they lead us in directions we didn't expect. The text actually suggests that our biggest breakthroughs often happen when we step outside our comfort zones and embrace the unknown.
So trusting that the creative process will guide us, even when we can't see the whole path ahead.
Exactly. The text goes so far as to say, the mind itself is the origin of judgments and can block our access to follow through.
Wow, that's a powerful statement. It's like this source is saying creativity goes way beyond just a clever idea or a beautiful object. It's about aligning with something much bigger than us.
Absolutely. This source is urging us to tap into a deeper well of creativity, one that's connected to something beyond our individual egos.
It's like that Einstein quote, creativity is intelligence having fun. When we tap into that playful, intuitive part of ourselves, that's when the magic really happens.
And that playfulness, allowing ourselves to experiment and explore without judgment, that's so crucial for the creative process. The text actually says that support for individual perceptions, ideas, creative insights is an outcome of healthy culture and acceptance of vulnerability and being incomplete human.
That's so true. Because so often we're taught to aim for perfection, to avoid mistakes. But this source seems to be suggesting that true creativity requires us to embrace imperfection, to be okay with making mistakes and learning from them.
Exactly. It even says that incompleteness is about being a process awareness. It is never ready, always on the way towards something and coming from somewhere and trying to access the nowness.
Wow, that's really deep. It's like this whole idea of embracing the journey, being present in the process of creating, rather than obsessing over the final product.
Exactly. The text takes it even further, suggesting that this unfolding of creativity isn't just about making something new, it's also about our own personal growth and evolution.
So are we talking about creativity as a spiritual practice?
In a sense, yeah. It describes creativity as a journey of listening and silence, and personal devotion to self-seeing beforehand, and selfless wisdom to read the cues correctly enough.
So it's not just about expressing ourselves, it's also about becoming more aware, more compassionate, and more connected to something bigger than ourselves.
That's a great way to put it. And this kind of deep transformative creativity, it needs us to be vulnerable, to let go of the need to control, and to be open to the unknown. It even says letting go of personal desires and allowing the passion to work only for the collective good of the whole.
That's really powerful, but honestly, it feels a little overwhelming, like it's a lot to handle. This idea of creating not just for ourselves, but for everyone's benefit.
It is a lot to consider, and this text doesn't pretend the creative process is easy. It acknowledges that it can be painful sometimes, that we might have to confront our own limits and fears.
So how do we deal with those challenges? How do we find the courage and strength to create authentically and with integrity, especially when it's hard?
The source points to a few things. Humility for self and others, unlimited time, holding a conscious orientation beyond current abilities to see, surrendering to the process and the truths revealed by it without judging and categorizing before realizing multiple truths and having experience of the process.
Wow, that's quite a mouthful. So basically, it's about trusting the process, being patient with ourselves, and being open to learning and growing along the way.
Exactly. And remembering that even when it feels like we're failing, those failures are opportunities to learn and grow. As the text says, you probably have to hit your head on the obstacle of development, some of which are only resolved by maturation of your creative constructions and liberating boundaries from awareness.
Like that saying, we learn more from our failures than from our successes.
Absolutely. This text reminds us that creativity isn't about getting praise or achieving some kind of outward success. It's about the transformation that happens inside us when we create in a way that's authentic and meaningful.
It's about the journey, not the destination. You know, it's really interesting how this text connects personal growth to creativity. It's like we're not just creating things, we're actually creating ourselves in the process.
Right. It's a really cool way to think about it. And this text goes a step further. It uses this powerful metaphor.
Oh,
It describes letting go of a creative work, like learning to die to yourself again and again as you let go of your baby, the product of your creativity.
we talked about dying to yourself before, and I gotta say, it's still a pretty intense way to put it. Can we unpack that a little bit?
Okay, so think of it this way. You put your heart and soul into something, whatever it is you create. It feels like a part of you, right?
Yeah.
Letting go of that, sending it out into the world without needing to control it, that can feel like a death in a way.
Okay.
A death of the ego, that part of us that needs control and recognition.
So like when you're a parent and your kid goes off to college,
Yeah,
you've raised them, but ultimately their path is their own.
exactly. We don't have control over how people see our creations, how they understand them, or even how they might change over time. And that's where the real challenge is, but also the real freedom.
It all comes back to trust, doesn't it? Trusting that something meaningful will still happen, even when we let go of control.
Absolutely. This text argues that true creative power comes when we detach from needing a specific outcome. When we let go of forcing things, we open ourselves up to way more possibilities.
So it's not about being passive in our creativity, but being open to something beyond what we initially imagined.
Exactly. And this text gives a lot of examples of what happens when we get too attached to our creations, even if our intentions are good. Think about the internet or AI, even social media. They're incredible, but they've also had consequences that no one saw coming.
It really reminds us that the things we create have a much wider impact than we might realize at first.
For sure. And that's why this source emphasizes that we have to approach creativity with a lot of responsibility, humility, and a good understanding of our own limitations.
So it's not just about what we create, but the energy and awareness we bring to the process itself.
That's it. We're part of something bigger when we create, and what we do has an impact far beyond ourselves. This whole deep dive has been really eye-opening for me, challenging what I thought I knew about creativity. If you had to sum it all up, what's the most important thing for people to take away from this?
I'd say this. The creative journey is about so much more than the things we produce.
Okay.
It's about how our consciousness evolves, how our hearts open up, and how we connect more deeply with ourselves, each other, and the world.
Yeah.
What if the real masterpiece isn't the painting or the song, but the transformation we go through while creating it?
That's a beautiful thought. It's not about the end result, but the internal shifts that happen when we connect with our creativity in a real, meaningful way.
This has given me so much to think about, and I hope it's done the same for everyone listening. We've talked about intuition, mindful creation, letting go of outcomes, and embracing the power of creativity to change us. Remember, everyone has that creative spark within them. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, we'll leave you with this. How might your life be different if you saw it as an ongoing act of creation? Until next time, keep exploring, keep creating, and keep diving deep.